support in Indian Wells. Look at this. I mean, this was in Australia. Court 6 literally had a line. I know I'm exaggerating, but it went for miles at the Aussie. It was wild scenes there. Allie, can you remember a women's star who gets this type of support wherever she goes?
Yeah, well, Taylor Swift. I mean,
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
This 21-year-old tennis player from the Philippines is accomplishing something that top-ranked champions and Grand Slam winners simply can't replicate. She's filling arenas, overwhelming websites, and giving event organizers serious challenges when it comes to managing huge crowds. Industry insiders are openly questioning whether she's become the most magnetic figure in women's tennis. Not the most talented, but the most captivating. Those are entirely different debates. What's your opinion on Alex Eala? Has she already become the most compelling personality in women's tennis? Rankings aside, share your thoughts below because I'm genuinely curious to hear different viewpoints on this.
no, I'd have to say maybe a little bit of Sania Mirza. Back in her heyday, obviously the Indian fans took to her and they followed her all around the globe, obviously not to this extent. And I think the ceiling that Alex Eala has is obviously that much higher. And I'm gonna bring in a little boxing here because my dad wanted me to be a boxer, but I chose tennis. But Manny Pacquiao.
Good call.
Manny Pacquiao, we saw him when he, was at the top of his game. And alongside Roger Federer, he actually had more prize money. So I think that if Eala, can keep doing well with her tennis, who knows? The sky's the limit on the court, off the court. I mean, she could be rolling it.
All right, let's look at a statistic that honestly feels unreal. Alex Eala's pre-tournament media session at the 2026 Australian Open generated 171,000 views. Novak Djokovic recorded 80,000. Aryna Sabalenka drew 9,000.
Take a second to process that.
The reigning world number 1 in women's tennis, a multiple Grand Slam champion who overpowers opponents with a kind of force that makes them look completely outclassed, attracted just 9,000 views to her press conference. Eala pulled nearly 20 times that figure, and people inside tennis aren't even pretending this is normal anymore.
She's got a smile that lights up a room too, and I remember last year when she beat Iga Swiatek, and she kind of did it with a lot of grace and humility, and it was really, for me, it was terrific to see her take that match and watch her play after that and watch her try to continue to progress, because I like her game. Obviously, she wants to get better than where she is now, than 32 in the world, but she's got a lot of good hand-eye coordination and ability to take the ball early and redirect. But the fan stuff is always fun for me, because whenever you see players from smaller countries, the fans are so passionate when they get up to the top.
It's interesting, Ali mentioned Sania Mirza. She has nearly 13 million followers on Instagram. That's 5 million more than Carlos Alcaraz, and nearly as many as Alcaraz and Sabalenka combined. So that's how big Sania Mirza was, and will be. But Eala going to be seeded for the first time at a 1,000 to find out who she will play in the second round. Check out.
Here's how tennis experts are discussing Alex Eala in 2026. There's nothing cautious about it, nothing restrained. None of the usual polite tennis commentary, where every player is labeled talented with promise. That phase is over. Former ADP pros Sam Querrey and Steve Johnson recently talked about something many in tennis have been quietly considering. They asked directly whether Alex Eala has become the biggest attraction in women's tennis right now. Johnson didn't hesitate. His answer was yes. Not maybe. Not she's getting there.
Yes.
That response needs context because being the biggest attraction means something very specific. It's not about being the most accomplished player. It's not about holding the highest ranking. It's about who fills stadium seats, who overloads streaming platforms, who makes tournament organizers anxious about crowd control before the first point is played. And when you look at it that way, arguing against Eala in 2026 becomes extremely difficult. Let's go back to Australia, because that's where this latest wave of expert recognition truly picked up momentum. The atmosphere around Eala's matches at the Australian Open was described as chaotic by reporters covering the tournament. Lines stretching incredibly long, crowds forming that made little sense based strictly on rankings. Here was a player ranked outside the top 30 at the time, creating the kind of pre-match buzz that Grand Slam organizers usually associate with seeded players in later rounds. The Filipino support was massive, passionate, and organized in a way that felt less like a standard tennis audience and more like fans attending a major concert. Passionate national backing isn't new in tennis, but the scale of what's happening with Eala is making even experienced commentators struggle to find comparisons. When asked which women's player generates this level of traveling international support, one analyst mentioned Sania Mirza, and that's serious territory. Mirza had Indian supporters following her events around the world during her peak. Her Instagram still sits at nearly 13 million followers, roughly 5 million more than Carlos Alcaraz and nearly as many as Alcaraz and Sabalenka combined. That represents authentic global cultural influence in tennis, and experts are suggesting Eala's potential may go even further. Another name that surfaced in that conversation was Manny Pacquiao, which tells you everything about the level of comparison being made. Pacquiao, at his height, was among the most recognizable athletes worldwide. His fights became national events in the Philippines. The entire country adjusted schedules around his matches. At his commercial peak, he was reportedly earning in a similar range to Roger Federer when combining prize money and endorsements. When tennis analysts begin referencing Manny Pacquiao as their closest comparison, the discussion has clearly moved beyond ordinary boundaries. And these aren't just enthusiastic fans making those comparisons. These are former professionals and analysts who've spent years observing the sport while trying to stay objective. So, what's actually driving the surge? The fan loyalty doesn't appear out of nowhere, and it isn't purely emotional. There's a distinct mix of factors working in Eala's favor that's creating something tennis hasn't quite experienced in this exact form. First, her journey is uniquely compelling. Eala trained at the Rafa Nadal Academy. She spent her developmental years away from home, sharpening her skills in Spain within one of the most demanding competitive environments in tennis. She rose through the junior circuit, won junior Grand Slam titles, then faced the brutal challenge of converting junior success into professional results on the main tour, which any tennis fan knows is where many junior champions quietly fade. The transition from junior standout to legitimate WTA contender is unforgiving, and most players don't manage it successfully. Eala did, and she did so in a way that deeply resonated with fans who had been watching her progress. When she defeated IGA Swiatek, who was world number 1 at the time, it was the kind of win that reshapes public perception. Not just because of the opponent she beat, but because of how she handled it afterward. The composure, the quiet confidence, the humility in that moment showed she understood the significance without exaggerating it for cameras. That authenticity leaves a lasting impact. It builds a kind of loyalty that cannot be manufactured. Second, the market she represents is enormous and largely untapped in tennis. Southeast Asia is one of the fastest-growing regions for sports consumption globally. Digital engagement, social media interaction, and demand for live sports content across the Philippines and nearby countries represent a commercial opportunity global sports bodies have been trying to access for years. Eala doesn't just appeal to that market. She represents it in a visible and personal way. When Filipino fans watch her compete, travel across continents to see her at a Grand Slam, or repeatedly refresh streams waiting for coverage to load, something deeper than simple sports interest is happening. It's cultural representation at the highest level of an individual sport. It's seeing someone who shares your background competing on the world's biggest stages. That emotional drive isn't based on rankings. It's rooted in identity. And in 2020 SIXS sports marketing world, identity spreads faster than almost anything else. Third, her tennis ability is genuinely strong. This matters because influence without results doesn't last long. Eala possesses real technical skill. Her hand-eye coordination stands out. Her ability to take the ball early and redirect pace to shift point patterns before opponents can recover has been identified by coaches as a legitimate weapon. It's not just entertaining, it's tactically effective. It creates issues that higher-ranked players have struggled to solve. She entered 2026 with momentum, performed strongly in Dubai, and climbed 16 spots to reach a career-high ranking of number 31 by late February. She's heading into Indian Wells, one of the tour's premier combined events, with a first round bye thanks to that ranking, and she arrives with a 10-6 season record. Those numbers show she's competing consistently, winning matches, and building confidence. This isn't just a social media storyline about popularity without performance. Her on-court results are improving, and the timing of that rise aligns perfectly with her growing public profile, strengthening both simultaneously. Now, here's where it becomes particularly interesting from a business and structural standpoint. Tournament directors in the Middle East and Southeast Asia have openly compared her drawing power to Manny Pacquiao. Novak Djokovic, who has experienced virtually everything in tennis and rarely shows surprise, has described the excitement around her as a positive problem for the sport. When Djokovic labels your fan base as a positive challenge for tennis, you've entered a completely different category of athlete. Crowd patterns are already creating logistical complications. Attendance for her matches has exceeded venue expectations. Organizers are managing situations they didn't anticipate because a player ranked outside the top 30 is generating demand typically reserved for higher tiers. Indian Wells is next, and observers expect Filipino supporters to show up in large numbers. The comparison that continues to surface, and deserves serious reflection, is what Sania Mirza represented for Indian tennis internationally. Mirza created a blueprint for how a player from a non-traditional tennis nation could build a fan base that crossed borders and lasted beyond active competition. Her 13 million Instagram followers exist not because she was the best player of her era, but because she symbolized something bigger than tennis to a massive community. She became a cultural figure who happened to compete at an elite level. Analysts are now suggesting Eala's potential in that dimension may be even higher. Not cautiously, but confidently. And the current engagement metrics support that view. A press conference attracting 171,000 views compared to Djokovic's 80,000 isn't random. That's an audience clearly signaling who they want to watch. Social media also plays a critical role because that's where younger audiences, the group that will shape sports business for the next 2 decades, decide their loyalties. Eala belongs to a generation raised in this digital environment. Short-form videos, instant interaction, behind-the-scenes access, the type of presence that turns sports highlights into shareable cultural moments. Her victories circulate quickly. Her personality connects in interviews in a way that translates naturally on screen. As one analyst sincerely put it, she has a smile that lights up a room. That might sound simple, but in today's attention-driven sports media landscape, charisma and warmth are powerful assets. They determine whether moments go viral or fade away. Coco Gauff recently set the standard for what a young women's player with mainstream crossover appeal can achieve. The sponsorship deals, the cultural reach, the ability to connect with audiences beyond traditional tennis fans. Eala, according to multiple analysts tracking trends in real time, is already generating similar levels of attention in certain markets and surpassing Gauff in engagement metrics within Southeast Asia. That's significant. The ranking gap between them remains clear. Gauff is a Grand Slam champion and a top 10 player. But the audience growth around Eala doesn't resemble that of someone ranked 31st. It looks much larger. And the tennis establishment is starting to accept that ranking alone doesn't fully define influence in her case. What does this mean for Eala's future? The outlook is genuinely exciting, and experts recognize it. She's 21 years old. She's rising in the rankings just as her cultural profile is accelerating. At 21, there's still tremendous room for physical and technical development. If her results continue improving with deeper tournament runs and more wins over top 10 opponents, and if she turns a ranking of 31 into 15 or even 10, the blend of performance and influence could produce something women's tennis hasn't truly seen before. Not just a great athlete with international fans, but a competitor who represents a movement backed by one of the world's most passionate sporting nations, performing on a global broadcast stage. The ceiling, as experts repeatedly emphasize, is extremely high. And even now, in early 2026, the foundation is strong enough to make tournament directors rethink logistics and former champions search for boxing comparisons to properly describe it. This isn't something most serious tennis observers predicted 2 years ago. Yet it's very much the reality today. Eala has grown beyond being simply a tennis story. She's a viewership phenomenon, a cultural force, and apparently a crowd management challenge, which is arguably the best kind of challenge to have. If you want more in-depth analysis like this on the players truly shifting tennis right now, hit like and subscribe. There's much more content on the way.